The noose creaked before the dawn bell. Wet canvas snapped over the Fort Smith gallows, and guards stamped their boots against the chill rising from the Arkansas River. Friday, September 3, 1875, the first mass execution ordered by a new federal judge, no one yet called the hanging judge. A carpenter palmed the trap's joint one last time. Sawdust drank the night's dew. When the yard gate swung, lanterns cast long shapes across the stockade. A preacher murmured scripture, deputies checked knots, and executioner George Maladin stood with a coil of manila and a face that gave nothing away. Inside, Judge Isaac Charles Parker, 36, square-shouldered, quiet, signed the final warrants and set down his pen. Jurors had spoken. By law, sentence had to follow. When Parker arrived that May, the federal courtroom was an old Army commissary that smelled of damp wood and ink. The Western District of Arkansas reached far beyond the river towns into Indian territory because Congress had not yet supplied full federal courts there. The docket already bulged: murders on lonely traces, whiskey peddlers, rapes at remote camps, ambushes along cattle trails, and fugitives who vanished into the folds of the Choctaw and Cherokee nations. Tribal courts kept authority over their own people, but when a non-Indian killed in the nations, Fort Smith had the case. Parker inherited a court with too little money, too few deputies, and a countryside where a knock at night could be an ambush. He set a tone the first morning. Court opened at 8 and ran until lamps burned low. No continuances without cause. Jurors would be paid, witnesses protected, interpreters provided. He swore in a new U.S. Marshal and told him to hire straight brave men who wouldn't take a fee to look away. Within weeks, deputy marshals rode out under writs with names and distances written in ink that bled when it rained. Among them rode Bass Reeves, formerly enslaved, a horseman with a steady hand and a gift for languages, along with Heck Thomas. Their work began where road ended, weeks in the saddle, sleeping in brush, serving warrants in country where the law arrived only with the lawman. The gallows didn't build the court, the jury box did. Under federal law then, a murder conviction carried a mandatory death sentence. Parker could not invent mercy, he could only recommend it to the president. In his first term, the indictments stacked like cordwood. A 6-week summer session in 1875 produced more than 100 felony cases. That September, 6 condemned men climbed those steps. The trap fell clean. Newspapers counted and a nickname began to stick: the gateway to the gallows. Parker had not come for spectacle. He was a former Missouri congressman and small-town lawyer who believed proceedings might hold a wild place together. He kept the bench plain and ran trials like a machine: indict, arraign, empanel, hear, charge, decide. He required counsel for the poor and warned jurors to ignore rumor and revenge. He watched deputies die in the nations, men shot from corn cribs and creek banks, and watched defendants hauled in bruised. He made the record hold both truths. The stories that fed his reputation were written on the road before they were read in court. Reeves once rode 50 miles with a captive only to find the river up. He swam because a writ does not dissolve in floodwater. Another posse cornered a gang in blackjack and took fire so close the leaves scorched. They cut the outlaws out with buckshot and rope burns. Witnesses traveled by wagon bed and spoke through interpreters, each offering a piece that Parker stitched into a trial. By the end of his second year, the numbers had a shape: hundreds convicted of robbery, whiskey selling, and assaults, dozens convicted of murder, more than a dozen hangings. Across 21 years, he would sentence 160 to die, 79 would hang. The difference lived in pardons and commutations, in acquittals after 1889 when capital cases finally gained appeal, and in grim arithmetic on the road. Some condemned never reached the scaffold because the nations took their own fee along the way. Maladon honed his craft without show. The yard stayed closed to the curious. He kept the knot and the drop to spare the condemned useless suffering. The judge held the same line in court. He threw out coerced confessions, fined lawyers for tricks, and scolded jurors who tried to smuggle gossip into deliberations. He seated native witnesses as equals when many benches would not. He wrote presidents to ask mercy for the young or the simple-minded. "I favor the death penalty," he told one reporter late in life, "because the law commands it and the frontier demands it," then added what headline writers omitted: that if Congress changed the law, no man would be gladder. Congress did change the frame. In 1889, it created appeal in capital cases and trimmed Fort Smith's spur into the nations. New federal benches opened in Indian Territory and at Paris, Texas. Parker's docket thinned, then surged in bursts as old cases ripened. He sat in the same plain room, gavel in hand, scarred desk before him, a jar of peppermints for fainting witnesses. Witness fees arrived late. He ordered them paid anyway. The old gallows rotted and were rebuilt. Maladin retired and for a time toured a tent show of ropes and photographs. Parker disliked the circus, but could not forbid a free man's living. Behind the totals lived the ordinary ledger of any court: petty thefts, bad whiskey, men who broke heads with the nearest thing because there was nowhere to set anger down. Mary O'Toole Parker kept a house near the courthouse and poured tea for women waiting on verdicts. Their husbands' names rarely made the papers. A deputy's widow moved back to a farm with 3 children and a pension that stretched only if weather blessed it. In the Cherokee Nation, a family set an extra plate for a brother who had gone to Fort Smith as a witness and never returned for reasons the record could not cleanly explain. The law reached far. It did not reach everywhere. The last big execution came in 1896. Parker's beard had gone white, his eyes tired. He leaned forward to catch testimony and kept rulings in his head because few lawyers in the district owned books worth trusting. He was ill and knew it. He answered one more round of reporters looking for the man under the nickname. He told them to walk the jail and ask the men why they were there. The answer would be whiskey and a gun. He begged Congress again to fund witness fees and marshals, to build courts closer to the crimes, so Fort Smith would no longer be a funnel for every evil west of the river. Some of that came true, too late for him to see. Isaac Parker died on November 17, 1896, at home in Fort Smith, after more than 21 years on that bench. They buried him on the hill. The gallows came down. The yard quieted. Files thick with his orders gathered dust, then interest. Historians counted backward and parsed the legend. 160 death sentences, 79 hangings, thousands of criminal cases, a frontier system trying to make rule of law where a rule of revenge had stood. Some called him cruel. Others called him necessary. Most agreed on the machine he ran: juries, deputies, interpreters, the unglamorous inventory of a court that worked because it had to. Stand at the reconstructed gallows, and the river runs slow and brown. The timber smells new. The names of those who died there are carved on plaques. The names of those they killed are harder to find. Out west, the nations long ago became Oklahoma, and the benches Parker begged for were built and then multiplied. Lay the old docket across the present, and a narrower truth still shows. Law is not the story of a single judge and a single scaffold. It is a community deciding, case by case, to put distance between anger and action. The figure on the Fort Smith bench was not a myth. He was a working judge in a hard district, his life measured in court days and files. In deputies he buried and defendants he sentenced under laws he did not write. He made mistakes because men do. He stood his ground because the ground needed standing. The nickname is what people remember because it is bright and simple. The rest is slower, but it is the reason the nickname mattered. a courthouse that held when most things around it did not. Thank you for listening to Deserted Trails. Subscribe for more forgotten stories from the old frontier.